So what is really going on between the United States and Iran? Behind the scenes, there's this story about potential diplomacy. But out in the open, for all of us to see, it's a full-blown war of words and the rhetoric is getting more and more dangerous. Today, we're going to unpack those public statements and try to figure out what's actually happening.
Okay, let's just dive right into the heart of it. It's like we're watching a tale of two completely different victories. On one side, you have the White House saying, loud and clear, that Iran has been militarily defeated. But then, you have Iran's foreign minister claiming that the U.S. even talking about negotiations is proof that they're the ones who have been defeated. So, how can both sides be winning?
And yeah, that's the big question we're going to investigate today, right? With both sides claiming they're on top, who is actually winning this incredibly dangerous war of words?
First up, let's break down the official story coming out of the United States. It's all built around this strategy that they call coercive diplomacy. And while the language coming out of the White House is intense, a spokesperson basically said, look, President Trump isn't bluffing. If Iran doesn't get with the program, he is prepared to unleash hell and hit them harder than they have ever been hit before. That is not mincing words.
So what exactly is coercive diplomacy? It's a really key term to get your head around the U.S. strategy here. Basically, it's using threats, or maybe even some limited military action, not to start an all-out war, but to force your opponent to back down and change what they're doing.
And President Trump himself is out there front and center, saying this coercive strategy is a massive success. He's claiming the U.S. is winning so big and flat out insisting that, behind the scenes, Iran is desperate to make a deal. It's a classic move from that playbook. You project absolute confidence to try and force the other side's hand.
But here's where it gets complicated. While the administration is projecting all this confidence to the world, there's a number back home that tells a slightly different story: 36%. That was President Trump's approval rating in a recent poll, and it suggests that this conflict with Iran and how it's affecting stuff like gas prices might be putting some real pressure on him domestically to get a quick, decisive win.
Okay, so that's the U.S. narrative. But what about Iran? How are they officially responding to all these claims of victory and secret talks?
Well, Iran's response is a direct and total shutdown of that idea. Their foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, basically argues that the U.S. used to demand unconditional surrender, so the fact that now, suddenly, they're talking about negotiating, he sees that as clear proof that the U.S. has accepted defeat.
And Iranian officials are being crystal clear. No negotiations are happening. And their stance really comes from a place of deep mistrust. They point to the past, saying that twice in just the last 9 months, they held talks, and what happened right after: U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. So because of that, their bottom line is firm. All airstrikes have to stop before they'll even consider starting a dialogue.
Now, the U.S. did put a 15-point plan on the table, but Iran's reaction was pretty dismissive. One diplomatic source called it extremely maximalist and unreasonable, so not even a good place to start the conversation, in their view.
And this brings us to a really critical point. This isn't just a war of words or diplomatic memos. We have to look at what's actually happening on the ground with the military.
And let's be absolutely clear, this is not just talk. The aggressive rhetoric we're hearing is being backed up by some very real, significant military force from the United States.
So let's run through what's being sent over there. We're talking about 2,500 Special Ops Marines and 3 warships. And, maybe most importantly, the 82nd Airborne Division is also being deployed. This is a rapid response unit that can be on the ground in the Middle East in as little as 24 hours. This is not for show. This is the real deal.
So when you see that kind of specialized, highly capable military power moving into the region, you have to ask the obvious question: what could the potential target be?
A lot of eyes are on a place called Karg Island. President Trump himself actually called it Iran's jewel of the crown, and it's easy to see why. It is the main hub for almost all of Iran's oil exports. It is the absolute lifeblood of their economy. A strike there would be, well, crippling.
But behind all this high-stakes diplomacy, all the threats, and all the military maneuvers, we have to turn to the most critical consequence of this conflict: its devastating impact on actual people, on civilians.
For civilians in Iran, this isn't some abstract diplomatic game. The reality for them is a relentless bombing campaign. There are reports describing U.S. and Israeli airstrikes hitting the country not just every day, but in some areas every hour. It's become this constant, inescapable part of life.
And the cost? It's just heartbreaking. In just one recent attack on a residential neighborhood near the city of Shiraz, The victims were 2 children. And that one incident, it's a tragic little window into the much larger human toll of this conflict.
And the scale of these attacks is just staggering. This isn't contained to a few border areas. Since this bombing campaign started, more than 200 cities across the entire country have been targeted. That's fear and destruction from one end of Iran to the other.
And look at the sheer destruction of civilian infrastructure. We're talking about over 81,000 civilian units, which is a really cold way of saying people's homes, their apartments, even their schools. Places where people live and learn, now either damaged or completely destroyed.
And then there's the final, awful number, the total human toll. Since these sustained airstrikes began, more than 1,400 people have lost their lives. That's over 1,400 families torn apart, 1,400 futures just erased. It's just a brutal reminder of the real-world cost of all this.
So here we are, stuck in this incredibly dangerous paradox. On one side, you have these words of war, with both nations claiming they're winning. And on the other, you have undeniable acts of war, with a devastating and growing human cost. So the most urgent question of all is, in a conflict with this much hostility, where on earth does the path to peace even begin?